John 11 begins with the announcement that a man named Lazarus was sick. You've probably heard of him before. Mary and Martha, Lazarus' sisters, went to find Jesus and told him, "Lord, the one you love is sick." Upon hearing this, Jesus doesn't seem too worried. In fact, he says, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death, but he says that through his sickness, God will be glorified. Another theological suggestion that God doesn't make people sick, but God is powerful in the work of healing. Jesus revealed he's not too worried about Lazarus' sickness. He remains in the place that he was staying for 2 more days before setting out for Judea. Now, anytime John's gospel notes that Jesus is heading back to Judea, there's a tone change. If it was a movie, the score would have all of the minor notes start to come out. Bad things happen in Judea for Jesus. Only a few chapters back, he was run out of the Judean town that he was in. And so one of his disciples remarks in our reading today, "A short while ago, while the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" The disciple asks. Resolutely, Jesus, with a distinct Johannine response, says, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." Keeping in a very important Johannine theme of darkness and light. What happens in the day brings about life. What happens at night brings about death. In other words, if we run and hide, Jesus says, if we conduct our business in the night, we will have things to hide and people to run from. But we are people of the light. So Jesus is setting out to the place that wanted to kill him, to be about the business of life, even in the face of death. He tells his disciples that Lazarus has fallen asleep and that they're heading to the town called Bethany to wake him up. Now, with the privilege of hindsight, we know what that means. But the disciples have no reason to suspect a bodily resurrection, so they essentially reply, "Yes, I suppose if he is sick, a bit of sleep will help him out." But Jesus clarifies for them that he means Lazarus has died, and he intends to bring him back to life so that the disciples might believe, Jesus says. Thomas has the most amazing reaction to this, in my opinion. After realizing his friend has died, Thomas says, "Let us also go that we might die with him." Now, I'm not sure if Thomas still has the previous stoning in Judea in mind, and he means it sarcastically. Let us also go to Judea where we'll die. Or Thomas's heart burns with compassion for his friends. And this is his way of mourning and grieving with the one that he's lost. I think that's more in line with Thomas's character. By the time Jesus and his disciples arrive, Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. And the family's been mourning, along with a great number who have apparently come from Jerusalem, which is only a few miles from Bethany, where Lazarus, Martha, and Mary lived. When Martha had heard that Jesus was near, she left the house and ran out to meet him. The text notes importantly that Mary stayed at home at this point. And there's an interesting contrast from the famous reception that Jesus gets from who are likely the same Mary and Martha when we read in Luke 10. In that story, it's Mary that comes to greet Jesus, and Mary who sits at the feet of Jesus, eager to learn, while Martha works in the kitchen preparing food and drink for the guests. So Martha, in our text, having left the guests behind, leaving the funeral preparations to somebody else, leaving the cleanup, goes out to meet Jesus. And Martha says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Martha is, at least for a moment, turned toward the past. "If only you had been here," she remarks. How often our eyes are also fixed on the if-onlys of the past. But Martha confesses she knows something about Jesus. If only, she says. But then she continues, but even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. She seems to understand that the God of life doesn't deal in if-onlys. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Now, we have the benefit of the rest of the book of John, but she, like the disciples earlier, don't assume that Jesus is speaking of Lazarus' bodily resurrection. Instead, she clings to some future hope, some good bit of theology that gives her a sense of comfort, knowing that someday she'll see her brother again. But Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Jesus offers in our passage one of these important I am statements. Did you recognize it? We've been reading John for a while now. He explains to her that resurrection to life is not about a future with God and those we love. It's about truly living both here and in the future. Some variation of life or living shows up in the Gospel of John over 50 times. I didn't count, but that's what the internet says. Chapter 4, Jesus says in John 10, I came that they may have life, and what? Life to the full, or life abundantly. The thesis of the whole of John in John 20, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have what? Life in his name. The goal of belief in Jesus is not to achieve a prize at the end of your life. It is that through belief in Jesus, the life giver, we might have life now and in the evermore. Martha, upon hearing Jesus reveal who he is and why he's come, says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world, which happens to be a very complete confession of belief for John's gospel. She uses all the really important revelatory words, Lord, Messiah, Son of God. It's a full sentence, indicating she really gets it, even when others might not. And for this conversion of belief, we don't have to have some kind of long, drawn-out revelation like we have in several other stories in John. Importantly, Jesus says, I am, and immediately she confesses that she believes that Jesus is. She also says that she believes Jesus is coming into the world, which is another really important present tense use. As Jamie Clark Souls puts it, Jesus is always the one coming into the world, every minute of every day, seeking us out. Every moment of every day is ripe with the promise of resurrection and life. The point is not to escape the world, but to transform it, such that it promotes flourishing of all creation, the creation that God carefully orchestrated. After having made her confession, she goes back to her sister Mary and tells her, the teacher is calling for you. She doesn't exactly oversell the fact that Jesus is giving out abundant life, but nonetheless, Mary heeds her sister's advice and goes to him. But I think the fact that she hadn't gone out to meet Jesus yet, the Mary, the one who sat at Jesus' feet to learn, hasn't gone out to meet him yet, indicates how she's feeling about Jesus at the moment. I think it's telling. She goes out to meet him, and she greets him in the same way that Martha did, except she falls at Jesus' feet mourning. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, she says, just as Martha did. But she doesn't follow her sense of grief with a sense of hope like Martha does. There's no but even now attached to the end of her statement. Instead, she says, my brother would not have died, and falls at Jesus' feet. And Jesus sees her grief, and he's deeply, deeply moved by it. And famously, Jesus weeps. While at parts of the story, Jesus may have seemed cold, waiting days to come meet his sick friend, taking his time getting to the body, Jesus demonstrates the grief and the compassion that he shares with all other humans. The Jews who had followed Mary where she had met Jesus said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying?" John carries the complexity of God's power in a bold theological remark. Why wouldn't God have saved this man's life? And this is the last we hear from Mary, at least until next week. Here, she isn't ready to call Jesus the Messiah, but Martha's willing. The text says again that Jesus was greatly disturbed. So he goes to the tomb where Lazarus was, and he asked for the tomb to be open. Martha interjects, "It's ripe in there. None of us want that. Don't open that tomb." Talk about re-traumatization. But Jesus responds to her, reminding her of what she's apparently already forgotten. "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" Which we have to assume he said elsewhere, because he didn't say that in our text. So they roll the stone away, and Jesus looks up to God and thanks him for hearing. But then Jesus says, "God, I know you always hear me, but I'm just saying it out loud for those who don't believe me yet," which seems like a funny add-on. But then Jesus says, "Lazarus, come out." And what happens? A mummified Lazarus comes out of the grave. Now, if he was wrapped like the mummies that I've seen, he hops out of the grave, which would have been quite the sight. Then Jesus says something seemingly insignificant, which I think carries weight. It's clear that he's still wrapped in his grave clothes, but Jesus tells the community that's there with him, unbind him and let him go. It was the community around Lazarus that lifted him up and cared for him. It was the community that sent for Jesus to come back and heal him. It was the community that hoped that even while Lazarus had died, that Jesus could bring about life in the broken situation. And here, it's the community that after the raising of Lazarus, Jesus asks to unbind the man and let him free. Jesus, the life giver, invites the community to engage in the same type of life-giving work that he's about. All too often, people who say they follow this life-giving Jesus look a little bit more like morticians than they do life-givers. Like we're the ones wrapping the grave clothes on people and burying them, not the ones who are unwrapping the grave clothes and setting them free. Like we're the people of condemnation and not the people of uplifting those who are hurting or lost or on the margins. Jesus invites his people to be about taking the grave clothes off. And they probably stunk to high heavens. Just because Lazarus is healed doesn't mean all of the stuff that oozed out of his body over 4 days, sorry for the graphic description, isn't still on the grave clothes that the church is responsible for unwrapping. We are called to join with one another in this type of growth and life-affirming work, even if it means getting down in the depths with the people who need it. Now, the story is always about Lazarus' resurrection, at least how most people tell it, but the way that John tells it, I really wonder if it's even more about Martha and maybe a bit more about Mary, and especially about the community that's around Lazarus. Martha has such a rich and important conversion story in this telling. And what she confesses she believes offers a rich teaching about the God of life. That she believes Jesus, who is right in front of her, is coming into the world. Indicates the type of Jesus that she believes in. To reiterate Clark Soules, Jesus is always coming into the world, every minute of every day, seeking us out. Every moment of every day is ripe with the promise. I think she chooses the word ripe on purpose. With the promise of resurrection. Martha's posture towards Jesus ought to be the posture of those who say that we believe in Jesus. It's not about just saying that Martha believes. It's about the commitment to the God of life that Martha is making. That's also codified by the invitation that Jesus gives to this community that's already been about the life-giving act and activity of caring for the loved one who is sick. The call to engage in the stinking mess of removing Lazarus' grave clothes is to act as if Jesus is present in redeeming all things that are broken. Now, it's not uncommon to wonder why, with all of the power, Jesus doesn't just heal all of the pain and brokenness in the world. And I think that's the thing that John carries, the tension of that he carries. And even the Jews who are around who comment, why wouldn't God have just healed this man like he healed the blind man? And I don't know exactly why Jesus doesn't alleviate everybody of brokenness and pain. But I do know that this passage and ones like these remind us that the people who believe in Jesus have a call to be about the business of mending broken things, lifting up the hurting, healing wounds. It's almost as if we ask the question, God, why don't you just fix all the brokenness? And then God reminds us time and time again that Jesus is always coming into the world to fix the brokenness. And one of the ways that Jesus does that is through the church. That God is healing the brokenness, and we're responsible for carrying some of the weight of that with Christ. We are called to be about the life-giving work of Jesus, who is coming into the world in part way through the church, through us. So the question that languishes is, are we morticians or are we life givers? Are we burying people or are we helping them be set free from the graves in which the world had buried them? The worship and prayer team is going to come up. If you need prayer, they'll be in the back. Worship team's going to lead us in another song. But the call for this morning is to be about the work of resurrection. The thing to hold on to this week is, if we confess that Jesus is Lord, and we say that we believe that Jesus is at work in lifting up the broken things of the world, and if it seems that Jesus is the one that's always coming into the world, then Jesus is coming in the world through us in part. The hands and the feet of the one in whom we believe. So be the hands and the feet. The hands that unwrap the grave clothes for those who need it. And if you're the one with grave clothes on, by the way, that needs resurrection, Christ is coming into the world to raise you up. Turn toward Jesus and continue on your path of healing and growth. And turn toward us, followers, as we commit to meeting the broken and the hurting, the emotionally and spiritually dead, as we commit to lifting up those who are on the margins, to taking the stinking grave clothes off, no matter what it costs, and pointing them back to the God of life. Amen.